Okay, peeps, welcome back. So today we're going to be going over the Bitcoin miners and how potentially, excuse me, we could be waiting a little bit for before the miners go back up in value. So with that being said, let's get it. All right. So first thing I'd like to go over before we actually go over the miners themselves is I want to go over the options portfolio. So you guys can see that we have a lot of different things going on here. It's kind of crazy looking, I know, but we have a lot of a couple of puts, but mostly sell calls on a lot of these different stocks. We'll just kind of ignore the traditional stocks for now and just take a look at. So we have Riot, HUD8, then HUD8 again towards the end of this month, and then HUD8 again in July. CLSK and Riot down here, and then we also have some btbt. So those are more long dated calls, not too worried about that. And we have another CLSK put here at $15. If this thing does actually get put, it will reduce the cost basis we have quite a bit. So you guys can see there is a risk here that it could get put. But we'll just have to wait and see on that one. So it's hard to say exactly where the bottom of CLSK is, but we are going to look at that on the charts in a minute. So just so you all know, we do have quite a bit of money in these miners. We did actually move some of the profits from the Grayscale Trust out of the Grayscale Trust and into the miners. You guys are probably like, what the hell? Why'd you do that? Well, it's quite simple because, again, Bitcoin is generally the first market mover, and then Ethereum, the altcoins, go afterwards. And when Bitcoin moves to its true parabolic move and goes to new all-time highs, which I think is probably going to happen at the end of this year, the Bitcoin miners and things like LTZ and BCHG and GBTC, if it still existed, would be the first ones to move up with Bitcoin, and then everything else would follow suit after that. So we want to be kind of at the helm of the beginning of the bull run. So we're positioning ourselves now to get in for when Bitcoin has its next big leg up to the upside. But anyways, as you guys can see here, we currently have 336 shares of HUD8, 1,400 shares of btbt. btbt is not really so much for options. It's kind of more so for the growth aspect, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So we also have 200 shares of Riot, which again is kind of a split between growth and options. Unfortunately, Riot kind of got smashed this last week. A lot of things did. I don't think it's necessarily because of Bitcoin. I think it's just kind of more because of the what is it called? The consumer confidence report, which I think came out on Friday. And the Fed heads talking, and apparently the markets didn't like a lot of what they heard because you guys are kind of seeing the results here. I mean, it's not just the miners. You can see a lot of these positions are actually also down. I mean, it's not as obvious on the portfolio, but if I go over to the watch list, you guys will see. So again, 200 shares of Riot, 100 shares of Mara. We just got put these. I'm going to write a cover call next week, and then 300 shares of CLSK. And in terms of the value that we have in the miners, this is how much we have currently. So you can see the numbers here. If I were to add up the native crypto portfolio and also the Grayscale trusts, this is again just in crypto. This does not include MSTY or CONY. Okay, this does not include those. If I were to include those, it'd be even more than this. But you guys can see we have a hefty amount in here. And so this just goes to show you guys we're not just talking about the miners, we're actually invested in it. But at the same time, a lot of people are probably wondering, well, why are you not as concentrated? Like, why do you not have a bunch in just two positions? Why are you all spread out like that? It's pretty simple, guys, because again, we're in a quantitative tightening bull market, which means that there's a lot of headwinds coming from the Fed and the Biden administration and all that stuff. And there's all the FUD and the nonsense with the SEC and Coinbase and Ripple, and you guys can look into that in your own time. But there's about a whole bunch of BS going on out there right now. And in my opinion, it's better to be a little bit more diversified in a QT bull market, whereas it's a little bit more better to be concentrated in a QE bull market, which is the opposite. That's quantitative easing. A lot of people would disagree with that. That's fine. Not a problem. That's just my personal experience. But the reason why this matters so much is because with QT bull market, we really don't know if we're going to get headwinds. There's going to be a market crash. You don't know if they're going to be able to control inflation. We don't know what the elections is going to look like this year, although I'd be willing to bet serious money on it that Trump is going to win the election this year. And I mean serious money. I'm talking 4 or 5 figures. I'd be willing to put that money up to basically bet that Trump is going to win this election because, again, I'm not going to get too much into politics here, but Trump would be the obvious solution to the problem that this country is currently having. So, but when we go back into QE, when the Fed cuts, when they start printing money, when it's been made clear to the markets that inflation is under control, all of that $6 trillion or whatever it is, the insane amount of money that's sitting in cash and cash equivalents on the sides is going to come flowing out of bonds and cash and money market funds, and it's going to go straight into risk on assets. Okay. That's when we're going to get our QE bull market. That's when it makes more sense in my mind, not financial advice, to start concentrating. Because again, stocks and pretty much all kinds of cryptocurrencies are going to moonshot. I think that's going to happen towards the end of this year. It makes perfect sense. The Fed said that they were likely going to cut towards the end of this year, or that there were going to be 2 rate cuts or something like that. Again, the Biden administration came out and said, I can't say for certain, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be a cut by the end of the year or something like that. You guys can go look it up. I don't want to talk about it, but not a big fan or supporter of Biden. I'll just simply say what he said. And I mean, ultimately, the Fed will have to cut because the country just can't afford to pay interest payments when the Fed funds rate's at 5.5%. Plus, we have the elections coming up at the end of the year, and nobody wants to see, prices through the roof on food and gas and, daycare and stuff like that. Nobody wants to see that. So it's good for the elections that the rates come down. So anyways, enough of that. Let's get into the charts. So I was seeing something here as I pulled this chart up, and this doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. Again, the prices were way higher in the past, but again, we have this massively overbought MACD. And generally, when I look for signs of a reversal on the MACD, I'm either looking for a death cross above the break-even level, which is in the middle of this histogram here between the green and the red bars, or for a golden cross, I'm looking for a golden cross below the 0 level, again, below the histogram. So we have a death cross above the histogram. This is on the weekly. You guys can see the last 2 times this happened. There was some kind of nasty sell-off. Does it mean that has to happen this time around? I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that the pullback we're seeing right now is kind of more like 2019, not so much like 2021. For those of you guys that were in crypto in 2019, you know what I'm talking about. Bitcoin had like a mini bull market, and then it kind of sold off, and then the real bull market happened the following year. I think we're pretty much right in line with that right now. I think we're in that 2019 part of the bull run, and I think at the end of this year, start of next year, we're going to see the real serious part of the bull run start taking place. But I did want to point that out, and again, we are coming from overbought territory on the RSI. So in terms of support and resistance zones, again, we're still kind of bouncing around in this rising broadening wedge here, which, I mean, it is actually a bearish pattern, but again, we kind of have these higher highs and higher lows, so I'm not necessarily so sure that this is actually going to be bearish. I mean, we could draw this a bunch of different ways. That's the problem with lines is with trend lines is you really never know exactly how it's supposed to be drawn. I mean, it could technically be drawn like this, kind of just touching these 2 wicks here, as you guys can see. So again, it's kind of ugly. It's not perfect, but that's could be considered to be an upward channel, which again is also bearish. But again, it doesn't necessarily have to play out. It just gives a higher probability to that setup, to the bear side. But of course, there is a small probability it could break out to the upside. So as of right now, support is still sitting between $12.50 to about $14, and resistance is 21-ish or so, 21.50, somewhere in there, to about 23.5. There is a lot of candle action right here, as you guys can see in the bottom of these wicks, at roughly around the $15 area. Kind of had a fake out down here and then immediately got sucked back to the upside and went straight up to $21. So that tells me that $15 level, if you guys are looking for options plays, that $15 level would be a strong area. Maybe to have a strike price for a put below that, maybe like a 14.50 put or something like that. Again, that's not advice. You guys can do what you want to with your own money. Figure this out for yourself. But that's kind of what I'm seeing. So in terms of the daily, Not really much going on with the RSI and the MACD. It's not as obvious what we're seeing, but we did have earnings. So again, the earnings was a beat on both fronts. That's very good for the price of CLSK, although not really sure why it's dumping. Maybe the markets just didn't believe it, or maybe there was some kind of bad forward guidance. I'm not sure. But if there was bad forward guidance, again, that would not be surprising because the Feds had their funds rate up at 5.5% for eons for like 8-9 months at this point. It's kind of ridiculous, but is what it is. At some point, they're going to have to cut. It's just a matter of time. They know that. We know that. There's no getting around it. So, in terms of the trend, we are still overall bullish. So, we're setting basically a series of higher highs and higher lows here. So, your low, high, higher low, higher high. Kind of this area right here would be like support, and then you have your low here, and then your higher low, and this would, or higher high, I should say. And this ideally, if this is a swing low right here, this would be a higher low. And then, of course, eventually we'll bust out of this resistance zone here. So in terms of CLSK, I would say this thing's looking pretty cheap. I mean, it's pretty close to the support zone. It's much closer than it was to to the resistance. Excuse me. But again, we were only at the resistance for a couple of weeks, so that's something to keep in mind. So Mara, this is kind of a funky one. Again, we have a MACD death cross above the break-even level. This is not as extreme as CLSK, as you guys can see here, the obvious major tops in the past. So there was a top, there was a top. I would say this one's not really that concerning. Again, it's not really massively overextended, so nothing to worry about there. CLSK is a little bit more worrying, but again, I don't think this is, I mean, even this one is not as high as this MACD death cross over here, so I wouldn't say it's too concerning. Again, I would say it's probably similar to 2019 versus 2021. Again, we kind of have like this microphone and or rising wedge pattern here. It's not a perfect microphone pattern, but if it was to remain a microphone pattern, this generally would break to the upside if I'm not mistaken. If it's a rising broadening wedge, it would fall to the downside. So, pick your poison. But as of right now, I would say this trend line down here is likely going to be support. Again, it is sitting above the EMAs, but if it gets below the EMAs, which is at 1650, which again, I hope it doesn't, but if it does, the support would be roughly around this $11 area. So you'd be looking at about 11 to 12 and a half, and then the resistance is going to be 18 and a quarter to $20, and then above that, 29 to about $33. So if we take a measured move from the trend line to the first resistance, you'd be looking at 81%, second resistance, 195% move. And that's just for the swing. That's not including options premiums. If you wanted to do that, there's that too. So you can see that Mara had earnings. It was a mixed bag. So a beat on earnings, miss on revenue. But again, Mara is one of the bigger Bitcoin miners. So me personally, I would not be too worried about Mara. I think it's probably a solid play. But again, that's something you'll have to research in your own time. We also do have a golden cross below the MACD here, or below the histogram on the 0 level on the daily time frame, and we have a series of higher highs and higher lows going on here kind of into this resistance. So that is something to keep in mind. Just so I make sure I have everything covered here, I'm going to go back to CLSK. So, and give you guys the measured move here again from the current level to the swing high up there is about 60%. And if you wanted to wait for it to get to the bottom of this channel to the swing high, you'd be looking at about 95% move. That does not include options. Obviously, options would up the amount of percentage gain you get on this. So Riot has come back down to a very heavily traded zone. You can see this was previously resistance a couple of years ago, turned into support. So unless it breaks this support line, or support zone, which again, I don't think it's going to do, I would say this is still very bullish. So about $7.70 to $10 on support and $18.50 to $21 on resistance. I would say now is as good a time to get in as any. That's not financial advice, but again, it is in the buy zone, and this zone has been traded for almost 2 years now. So you'd be looking at about 121% move. Excuse me. So Riot just recently had earnings, very similar to Mara, kind of a mixed bag. HUD 8, this one doesn't have earnings for a long time. There's not much to look at here on the indicators. Jesus. Sorry about that, y'all. So it does kind of look like the MACD wants to reverse on the weekly time frame. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But we do have the, well, never mind, scratch that. Okay, I was going to say we might have bullish divergence, but I'm looking at that wrong. So anyways, we're in this falling wedge. And again, the target is the top of the wedge, which is $23. We're currently at support, which again is going to be somewhere in between this wedge. So that's about $5 to say the top of the support is about $5 to $9. I don't think it's going to go down to $5 if I'm being completely honest. So 1770 to 2260 on the resistance. Just from the current price to the swing high up here is going to be about 188% move. And then from the bottom of this wedge, roughly about the bottom of the wedge to the top of the swing high, 367% move. So cifr, this is one we used to have, very similar to Mara. This thing has mixed earnings, but again, that's kind of to be expected. These are Bitcoin miners. The difficulty of the mining goes up every time Bitcoin has a halving. So miners have to find a way to offset those costs. So it is kind of a challenge, but in order to ensure and secure the network, that has to be done. So again, I'm going to go out to the weekly time frame here. I would say cifr is still a little expensive. Maybe throwing on some puts might be a bad idea to get some lower price, lots of lower prices. This is not really an expensive stock. 100 shares of this would be like $400 compared to something like Mara is going to be $1,700. It's 4 times as much. But that's up to you guys. So 210 on the support, 266 on the top of the support. So 492, roughly about 550 at the top of the resistance zone there. So from the current price down to support, you'd be looking at about a 41% drop. From the current price to the previous swing high would be about a 54% gain. And then from right around the middle of the support zone to the swing high up here, you'd be looking at about 135% gain on cifr. So btbt, this one is really just kind of been ranging in the zone for a long time. I think it's waiting. I think btbt is going to have its move towards the end of this year when Bitcoin does start running up to new all-time highs. And again, I think Bitcoin's probably going to hit somewhere between, on the very conservative side, 100 to 150K. If I'm being generous here, maybe up to $250,000 per Bitcoin. I don't think that's impossible. So again, support btbt is going to be $150 to about $2. Resistance is $420 to about $490, and then $5.25 at the top there. btbt, we're not really doing this one so much for options. As you guys can see, it's kind of more so for the growth potential here. And again, this was just one bull run. So from the current price to the peak of the bull run is about a 15x. I would say if we can get a 5x on btbt, we'd be pretty happy with that. 1,400 shares, about $3,400. We'd be looking at, I want to say roughly around, I think just shy of about 20K. So that's pretty damn good for one position. But if we just go ahead and do the measured move here from the support to the swing high, you'd be looking at about 150% move. bitf, this one's showing a bit of concern here. Again, this is kind of a, I forget what this pattern is called. There's a name for it. I can't think of what it is right now, but we kind of have like these sloping down of the EMAs that generally is a bearish sign. So we have a death cross on the yellow and the blue EMA. Haven't had one on the red yet. So I suspect this thing is going to come down to the trend line. Again, we are below that resistance. This candle right here on the weekly did close below that green one and those red ones. That's a bearish sign. So I suspect it's going to come down to this support trend line here and bounce at roughly about, I'd say $1.40 or so. Again, that trend's been respected since December of 2022. The swing high up here is roughly about $4. And for those of you guys that want to know what the all-time high on these are, for this one, it is about $10. So pretty good move, about 6 or 5, 6x somewhere in there on the move from the current price to the high. But from the current price to the swing high is about 133% move. And then if you were willing to be patient and wait for the trend line, it'd be a lot bigger. It'd be 184%. Now, in terms of just to get back to all-time highs, on cifr, you'd be looking at roughly about a 4x. HUD 8, you guys can see where we're loading the boat more heavily on this one over cifr. So the previous all-time high for a HUD 8 was like $83 here. So that's about a 10x, actually more than a 10x from the current price. Riot, again, the previous cycle high for this one last cycle was almost $80. So that's, again, more than an 8x at this current point. Mara was pretty up there. We don't really have Mara for the gains, more so for the options premiums, but I mean, the move would be pretty good. You'd be looking at maybe like about a 5x on this one. And CLSK, the last all-time high for CLSK was only $42, but again, we're not really doing this one for the gains, more so for the options premiums, although it would be kind of insane if it went up to $150. You guys can see that wick high up there, or candle high, whatever that is. I mean, it's possible. I don't know. I mean, if the demand really seriously goes up for the miners in the future and for Bitcoin, like if it starts like every country in the world and every bank in the world wants it, and everybody and their mom and grandma and great grandma and, you know, pretty much anything and everything on planet Earth wants Bitcoin, then yeah, these miners could, I mean, they could be huge. They could be absolutely crazily overvalued. So anyways, this is the Bitcoin miners for this week. Hope you all enjoyed this content. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see y'all later. Peace.